Welcome to the Friday Night Campfire Stories. My name is Rob. I will be your host, but not your narrator for this evening. If you're new here, every single Friday we experience one chapter from one of my brand new stories. This week is actually a very special week because we are getting into a brand new story. It's the first Friday of the month, meaning we are doing a brand new story. It is going to be a dive into an experience unlike anything we've ever done here on the channel. It is going to be covering my story, Astral. However, before we get into the story, I do have to do a few updates on the channel. Now, if you do not care about that, you're here for the story. If you just want to hear about the synopsis and then get into the story, there will be a timestamp right here that'll jump you right to the synopsis of the story. If you don't even care about the synopsis, you just want to hear the story, that's fine. I completely understand. There's a timestamp right here that'll tell you exactly where to go to start the story. But I do want to try to make this quick for everybody else. We are transitioning into a new chapter of the Friday Night Campfire Stories. There's been a few comments as of late. People are starting to hear the stories more, which is great. That's what I love to hear. I just want people to give it a chance and just listen to it. However, they have said that although they do love the stories, that maybe it's best if I try to make a change and use a text-to-speech app. Which is what we're going to be starting to do this week. If you've watched the shorts over the past week that I've been releasing, I've already kind of been experimenting with it, and that's what we're going to be doing today with the Friday Night Campfire Stories. I just feel like it's probably the best for the channel because, one, I don't really like my voice. I don't think a lot of people do. It's kind of hard to listen to, especially if you're going to listen to it for 20-minute videos, 30-minute videos. I feel like it would just be a much better viewing experience for you, which is what I want. I put so much love and care into these stories, and I just want everybody to listen to it and to give it a chance. And I feel like my voice might be kind of tempting people away. It's also very robotic, and I feel like it doesn't do enough justice for the story. And so because of that, I am going to be moving into using a text-to-speech app. But if there is a massive backlash against it, you guys are like, hey, no, this is not what we want at all. We want you to go back telling the stories. I have no objection to that. I'm just doing what I think you guys would prefer. And like I said, something that would create a better viewing experience for you guys. But now let's get into the synopsis of my story, Astral. Astral follows Callum, who's a young man who has had the same dream every single night for almost 2 decades. And at first, it definitely does scare him, but now that he's dealt with it for, like I said, nearly 2 decades, he's kind of just gotten really bored of it, and he's tired of it. But that all changes in one night when one slight change to the dream happens and opens a whole nother realm to Callum's world. It opens up a whole new world in the world that we live in. When I sat down to write Astral, I didn't have much thoughts on it. I kind of just had a beginning, an idea, and I knew where I wanted the story to end, but I didn't really have anything else planned for it. When I sat down to actually plan out the entire story, I quickly realized this story was going to be very, very big for me. And so I'm very excited to share it with you guys. The final thing I gotta tell you before we get into it is every single story we've done so far has been 4 chapters long, meaning we start the story on the first Friday of every single month and it's done by the end of the month. And then we start a brand new story. Astral was way too big to do that. We couldn't do that with Astral, so Astral will actually be the first one that is an 8-chapter series. That's right. We'll be covering it over the next 2 months. So definitely grab your blankets, grab your drinks, grab your food, whatever you need, get comfy, and let's enjoy this together. This is Chapter 1 of my story, Astral.
Chapter 1. The hum of the city outside Callum's apartment window was distant, muffled like a radio left on in another room. Nashville's nightlife thrummed below, but in his small studio, the world was still. Callum Vane lay in bed, staring at the cracked ceiling, waiting for sleep to take him. He hated this part of the night, the moments just before slipping into the inevitable monotony of his recurring dream. He turned over, punching his pillow into a more comfortable shape. The clock on his nightstand blinked 12:03 a.m. in red LED light, a faint irritation in the otherwise darkened room. "Here we go again," he muttered to no one but himself, his words barely more than a sigh. Sleep came quickly. It always did. And with it, the dream. Callum's eyes opened. He was no longer in bed, but sitting in a wooden chair at the foot of it, his legs crossed and hands resting on the chair's arms. The room was bathed in a soft, silvery glow, its source unclear but omnipresent. Everything looked the same: the scratched hardwood floor, the pile of laundry in the corner, the faint shadow of the clock's red light reflecting against the wall. Everything except himself. His body lay still in the bed, breathing deeply, chest rising and falling in the steady rhythm of sleep. The blanket was slightly askew, one arm draped over the edge. It was an image Callum had seen 1,000 times before, so vivid and real it felt like watching a live feed of his own unconsciousness. But it wasn't real. It couldn't be. It was the dream, the same dream he'd been having since he was a kid. A younger version of himself might have thought it was cool, even exciting. But now it was infuriating. He leaned forward in the chair, propping his elbows on his knees, and rested his chin in his hands. "Why?" he asked aloud, though he didn't expect an answer. He never got one. For years, he had tried to make sense of it. He'd scoured forums online, looking for explanations about recurring dreams, lucid dreaming, sleep paralysis, anything that might fit. Therapists had told him it was anxiety, a manifestation of some subconscious desire or fear. That hadn't helped. Every night, without fail, he ended up here, watching himself sleep like some kind of spectral babysitter. He let out a frustrated groan, rocking back in the chair. "I'm over it. Do something new already," he muttered to the dream itself, as if it were listening. Nothing changed. It never did. To make things even worse, he had forgotten to turn the TV on before falling asleep. Usually he would do this to give his dream self something to do throughout the night. The minutes dragged on. Though time in the dream was fluid, slippery, it could feel like hours or mere moments before the familiar blare of his alarm clock would pull him back to consciousness. He glanced at the version of himself on the bed, his face slack with sleep, and clenched his fists. How could a dream feel so vivid yet be so utterly uneventful? He tapped his foot against the floor, his patience wearing thin. Then, on a whim, he tried something he hadn't done in years. He moved. Not just shifted in the chair, but actually stood up. To his surprise, it was easy. His legs obeyed without hesitation, as if he'd always had the ability but had never thought to use it. His heart raced, a strange mix of exhilaration and fear. He took a tentative step toward the bed, then another. Standing beside his own sleeping form was unnerving. He reached out, fingers hovering just above the blanket, but didn't touch it. Something about the sight of his own hand in the glow of the dreamlight unsettled him. It wasn't quite solid, almost translucent. Callum pulled back, glancing around the room. A new thought crept into his mind. If I can move, what else can I do? His eyes drifted to the small television on the opposite side of the room, its remote sitting on the cluttered coffee table. If nothing else, maybe some background noise would make the dream less unbearable. He walked over, each step feeling lighter, less tethered. Picking up the remote, he aimed it at the TV and clicked the power button. The screen flickered to life with a harsh burst of static, the volume cranked to its maximum. A cacophony of sound erupted, shaking him out of his focused state. Callum jumped, fumbling with the remote, but the noise had already done its damage. His sleeping form stirred. The body on the bed shifted, groaned, and then bolted upright, eyes wide and panicked. Callum froze, the remote slipping from his hand and clattering to the floor. He watched as his physical self slapped the nightstand, searching for the source of the noise. The real Callum's breathing was ragged, his hair sticking up in disarray. "What the hell?" the waking Callum mumbled, running a hand down his face. He glanced around the room, his eyes scanning for something out of place, but there was nothing. Nothing except the now muted TV casting a faint blue glow. Awareness hit him like a wave. He and the waking Callum were not separate entities. They were one, split only by the boundaries of consciousness. The two could not coexist. As the waking Callum rubbed his temples, the projection flickered like a fading signal. The translucent form seated in the wooden chair wavered, the light of the room dimming as it dissolved. Within moments, the dream was gone entirely, leaving only the real Callum to exist in the quiet stillness of his apartment. He sat back on the bed, staring at the muted television, his mind racing. He didn't know what had just happened, but one thought kept echoing in his head. This was new. Morning light seeped through the thin curtains, drawing Callum's attention to the dull hues of the city skyline outside his window. With a sigh, he swung his legs over the edge of the bed and ran a hand through his messy, dark brown hair. His reflection in the mirror across the room showed a man in his mid-20s, lean but not athletic, with sharp features and perpetual shadows under his deep-set blue eyes. He scratched at the stubble lining his jaw, debating if it was worth shaving today. It wasn't. Callum wasn't the type to draw much attention. He preferred it that way. His wardrobe was an unremarkable collection of plain t-shirts, flannels, and jeans, all functional and low maintenance. Today's choice was no different. A gray shirt and a worn denim jacket that had seen better days. He liked it, though. It felt like him. After a quick breakfast of cold cereal and coffee, Callum grabbed his messenger bag and headed out. The city greeted him with its usual cacophony of honking cars and distant music spilling out of bars. His apartment building, a mid-century relic nestled between a boutique and a corner coffee shop, was nothing fancy. It had a charm, though, and it was close enough to his job that he could walk. Callum worked as an assistant at a small publishing house downtown. The job wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and gave him a quiet sense of pride. Most days were spent sorting manuscripts, proofreading, and fielding calls from frustrated authors. It wasn't the dream job he'd once imagined, but it was steady. It afforded him his modest life in the heart of the city, with just enough left over for a weekend beer or the occasional splurge on new books. The walk to work was brisk and familiar. He passed by a string of storefronts and street performers, nodding to the barista at the coffee shop on the corner, who always seemed to be working. As he approached the nondescript brick building that housed the publishing house, Callum felt the faint hum of routine settle over him. Another day, he muttered under his breath, pushing open the door and stepping inside. For now, at least, it was just another ordinary day. At the office, it was his usual day of mundane work. Lots of proofreading along with a phone call from this one old author who called in every day questioning something about his book and why they didn't use a different shade of orange on the cover or whatever he was on about that day. Callum often felt like his dream self while at work, just existing. He always received high remarks, though, from colleagues and his higher-ups. After work, Callum often would go to eat at his favorite restaurant. Nestled on a quiet corner just a few blocks from Callum's apartment, Copperhearth Bistro is a cozy, unassuming spot that exudes a rustic charm. The exterior is a blend of brick and weathered wood, with soft, glowing string lights hanging over the entrance, inviting patrons inside. The restaurant's name is etched on a brass plaque near the door, giving it a polished but understated touch. Inside, the space is warm and intimate. The walls are lined with reclaimed wood and accented with copper fixtures, from the sconces casting a soft amber glow to the mugs hanging above the small bar. A fireplace crackles in the corner during cooler months, adding to the bistro's welcoming atmosphere. The tables are a mix of polished oak and mismatched chairs, creating a homey, lived-in feel. Copperhearth is known for its eclectic yet approachable menu, specializing in Southern comfort food with a modern twist. Callum's go-to dish is the honey-glazed hot chicken and cornbread waffles, a perfect mix of sweet, spicy, and savory that's become a staple of his dinners. He often pairs it with a tall glass of sweet tea or their signature blackberry lemonade. The portions are hearty but not over the top, served with a thoughtful presentation that shows attention to detail without being pretentious. The bistro is run by a cheerful couple, Maggie and Ben, who greet Callum by name whenever he walks in. Maggie handles the front of house, always quick with a warm smile and a kind word, while Ben mans the open kitchen, often waving with a spatula in hand as regulars enter. The restaurant is rarely packed, but it hums with the lively conversation of locals who treat it like a second home. For Callum, Copper Hearth isn't just a place to grab a bite. It's a retreat, a sanctuary from the noise of downtown life. Whether he's catching up with a friend, diving into a good book, or simply enjoying the quiet hum of the space, this little corner of Nashville feels like a slice of home. During his dinner, he would often just scroll endlessly through his phone. However, tonight, he had something on his mind. It was his dream from the night before. How did he stand up? How did he grab the remote and turn the TV on? These questions pondered his head through the entire meal, finally soaking in all of the information and realizing how crazy it was that had happened the previous night. He physically grabbed the remote and turned the TV on while he was fast asleep in his bed. He started thinking maybe it was just sleepwalking and he didn't realize it. But how was he watching himself sleep every night then? Either way, Callum, for the first time in a long time, was ready to sleep tonight. He wanted to test out his new ability in his dream. If he could stand up and turn the TV on, what else was he capable of doing? After dinner, Callum would walk the streets of Nashville, getting the little exercise that he would do. He was always in love with the views of the city, walking along the Cumberland River and looking at all of the scenery it had to offer on this lovely spring day. After walking for a few miles, he arrived back at his apartment complex. He would begin his unwinding process for the night. This resulted in watching his new favorite show for a couple of episodes. However, this was cut short tonight because of how excited Callum was to fall asleep. He would take a quick shower and then hop into bed with a giddy smile on his face, ready to explore this whole new world that he had been missing out on by not even trying to move for so many years. This became a challenge, though, because with all the excitement as well as the early bedtime, Callum was unable to sleep. He tossed and turned, trying to get comfortable, but was unable to do it. His mind, buzzing with thoughts about what he was going to do as soon as he fell asleep, made it so he couldn't sleep. Getting more frustrated, his mind started drifting back to all of the days when he would fall asleep as soon as his eyes shut. He remembered the first time that he had this dream. When Callum was 9 years old, shortly after moving in with his aunt following the tragic death of his parents, he had his first experience with the recurring dream. It happened on a stormy night in late autumn. He had been lying in a guest bed too large for his small frame, surrounded by the unfamiliar smells of his aunt's house and the muffled creaks of the old building. The weight of grief and change pressed down on him as he drifted to sleep. In the dream, he found himself sitting at the foot of his bed, looking back at his sleeping form. The silvery glow of the dreamlight illuminated the room, soft but unnatural, making everything appear sharper than it did in waking life. At first, Callum thought he was floating above his body, an out-of-body experience like something he had once seen in a cartoon. But when he looked down, he saw that he was solid, seated in a wooden chair that didn't exist in reality. He was paralyzed with fear, convinced he was dying, that this dream was his soul leaving his body for good. Tears pricked his eyes as he stared at his own face, pale and unmoving, the slight rise and fall of his chest, the only reassurance he wasn't already gone. He called out to himself, his voice echoing hollowly in the stillness, but the body on the bed didn't stir. He tried to run, to escape the suffocating feeling of separation, but his legs wouldn't respond. He was frozen, forced to sit and watch, helpless. When he woke up the next morning, his heart was pounding, and his throat was sore from screaming into the void of the dream. He ran to his aunt, babbling about how he thought he had almost died. She held him tightly, smoothing his hair and assuring him it was just a bad dream, a trick of his grieving mind. But the reassurance didn't last. The dream came back the next night, and the next, and every night after that. At first, he dreaded falling asleep, terrified of the lifeless reflection of himself he was forced to watch. He tried staying awake as long as possible, but his young body always gave in to exhaustion. It took years for him to stop fearing the dream, and even longer to stop believing it was some sign that he was cursed or broken. By the time he was a teenager, the fear had dulled into frustration and boredom, but he never stopped wondering why it started or what it meant. That first night, however, set the tone for his relationship with the dream, an uneasy coexistence with something he didn't understand but couldn't escape. Callum still laid awake for hours, trying too hard to fall asleep but being unable to. He then heard a noise coming from outside of his apartment. It was a scream. The lady's scream caused Callum to run over to his balcony and look down. There was a woman whose purse was being taken by a man in a hood who also had a knife. Callum didn't think twice as he bolted out of his apartment and down to the street. The robber finally yanked the purse away from the older lady. He started to walk away before anyone could stop him. At this point, Callum burst out the front door of the complex and used all of his frame to tackle the robber into nearby trash cans lying near the street. The robber must have hit his head or something because he became unconscious. Callum then grabbed the purse from the man and started walking back to the woman. Something didn't seem right though, because instead of being thankful, the lady looked worried or concerned. He finally made it back to her and handed her purse back to her. Expecting to hear a thank you or something, the woman instead let out a yelp of worry as she took her purse and began running in the other direction, away from Callum. He found this very strange, but, not questioning the situation, went back inside to try and finally fall asleep. He used the elevator to get back to the 4th floor and entered back into his apartment. Callum took one sip of water before heading back to his bedroom. However, something was out of place. Callum was already in his bed, fast asleep.
That is going to do it for Chapter 1 of my story, Astral. I hope that you guys did enjoy. If you did, be sure to click that like button, hit that subscribe button, and let me know what you think about the new text-to-speech. I definitely am interested to hear if you guys enjoyed that more. Like I said, if there's any big backlash, I will go back to me telling the stories, but I do think that was probably a better way for you guys to experience it. Growing up, I watched a lot of Goosebumps, and so now I kind of have the idea of doing something like what R.L. Stine used to do, where he would pop up before the episode or after the episode, kind of give an intro and outro. So I'll still be here every week, but as far as telling the stories, I'm going to leave that to the text-to-speech, unless, like I said, you guys have any big problems with it, in which case I have no problem going back. But we are on the road to 500 subscribers. I'm trying to get there by the end of May, so if you guys could help, definitely click that subscribe button. We've been making some big jumps as of late, but we still have a ways to go before we get to 500, so definitely click that subscribe button. Also, if you cannot wait another week for this story, Astral, or any other stories that we're going to be telling over the next 6 months, then you can pick up my book, A Perfect Journey Through Villainous Eyes. It is available on Amazon right now. You can get it in both the paperback and the e-reader version, and you can go ahead and experience the entire story right now if you really wanted to. But if you don't, then we will see you back here next week. Don't forget to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and as always, thank you for spending a little bit of your evening here with me.